People abandon and surrender the things they love to pursue the right path. Perhaps this is the erosion imposed on me by the heavenly principles.
I've seen a lot of people question why Celestia destroyed Khaenriah, or why Khaenriah was devastated, or why the gods had to go to Khaenriah. But to that, I give you another question. What else could they have done? When you talk about the Cataclysm, the first thing on everyone's mind is the devastation of Khaenriah and the turning of its citizens. We are constantly reminded that the Cataclysm was Khaenriah's downfall, and that it was when the Traveler Twins were sealed away. But what about the bigger impact of the Cataclysm on the world around them? The reason why the Cataclysm was called that way wasn't simply because it affected Khaenriah, but because it horribly devastated the other 7 nations as well. The alleged creations of gold invaded the other countries, divinity and humanity alike needing to stop whatever abomination invaded their homes. Today, I'm going to be covering what happened 500 years ago to the other nations. What were the effects of Khaenriah's destruction, and the spread of abyssal energy to not only the underground city, but also to the neighboring areas of Teyvat. We also need to establish this important separation. The Abyss is not the Abyss Order. The Abyss Order are the people of Khaenriah, to our current canonical knowledge, who were turned into monsters of the Abyss as a form of punishment. On the other hand, the Abyss is an entity and dimension in and of itself, filled with mysterious dark energies that corrupt and are antithetical to celestial magic. It's important to understand that correlation during the Cataclysm, because as far as we know, the Abyss Order couldn't have existed if the people of Khaenriah haven't been turned yet. So, moving on. The cause of the Cataclysm to this day is still unknown, and the only source we truly have are a bunch of hearsay and a MONDSTADT book known as The Breeze Amidst the Forest. The destruction of Khaenriah was said to have begun because of an alchemist named Gold who was corrupted by her own ambition, until her shadowy army began consuming the entirety of Khaenriah. This event brought the fall of the Eclipse Dynasty, the ruling body of the nation. But we find out in more story content that it wasn't just Khaenriah that the abyssal monsters attacked, but also the other 7 nations. Let's begin with MONDSTADT. During the Cataclysm, the nation was terrorized by Durin, a black serpentine dragon that Gold created. The reason for Durin suddenly attacking are unknown, but all we know is that the Valen and Barbados were called upon by the people's prayers to save them from the black dragon. Except, the true story of the situation has 2 sides. First is the Skyward Spine's tale that praised the Valen's feats against Durin. The Skyward Spine called Durin covetous of the peace of MONDSTADT, and came forth to defile the land. The Skyward Spine says that Durin's black wings blotted out the sky, releasing clouds of toxic fumes, and that black rain fell from the sky. When Dvalin was called upon by Barbados, the 2 dragons fought and Dvalin was deeply poisoned by Durin's bites and claws. But at last, the Wind Dragon's razor fangs pierced his foe's throat, and his great claws tore out its corrupted heart. The sinner's creation, filled with eternal regret, fell from the spotless skies and fell to ruin upon a snowy peak. This was the beginning of Dvalin's soul corruption, but Durin's death was seen as the death of a terror. Durin was forever painted as a stain in MONDSTADT's history, but with the release of Dragonspine, we have a different image of Durin. Durin is instead depicted like a child that is happy to have been created by his mother and even thanks her for having him. A child that was eager to befriend Dvalin and Barbados, even calling them the lovely dragon and the lovely Bart. According to the Dragonspine spear, Durin dreamed a very long dream where he and everyone else had gone on a long journey, to a land where green grass grew and where soulful songs were sung. He dreamed that he sang along with the gentle people of the land, and that he danced in the sky with the dragon. But when he opened his eyes, he was already fighting Dvalin. Is it possible that Durin's mind was so corrupted that he envisioned his trip to MONDSTADT as something benevolent? That this young dragon was so weaponized to the point that he couldn't even tell he was already harming the dragon he called lovely? It's a fascinating thought, honestly. What could have happened to Durin that caused him to go berserk and attack MONDSTADT like that? But moving on. As a response to the Cataclysm, we have the Knights of Favonious who embarked on an expedition to exterminate monsters that speed forth. However, many were lost during the expedition. One of these fallen was Rostam, the trusted right-hand man of the Grand Master at the time, and more famously known as the lover of La Senora, the Crimson Witch of Flames. Rostam died in the Cataclysm after 23 years of service. This was also when the Crimson Witch of Flames was born, slowly but surely ridding the world of abyssal creatures. Now here's something that I'm personally unsure happened 500 years ago. The invasion of Wolvendom was never truly stated to be directly in the Cataclysm, but with the information we have so far about the attack of the wolves, it's really recent. The earliest we know at the moment is during Razor's story quest, but we don't have solid information that the Rift Hounds were there during the Cataclysm in MONDSTADT. We do know, however, that they were in Inazuma. The biggest occurrences for Liyue during the Cataclysm was in the Chasm and Duyun ruins. For the Chasm, abyssal monsters slowly began seeping out, and Rex Lapis personally ordered the Millith to rush to the defense of the mines. The abyss began pouring forth, and the Millith escorted countless civilians to safety. And then, the nameless Yaksha came to courageously protect the miners of Liyue and to fend off the monsters of the abyss. The nameless Yaksha was not under the command of Rex Lapis, but is instead an act of redemption from a long-standing sin, an alleged price paid for cowardice and dereliction of duty. It is still unknown whether the Yaksha perished, but with the coming of the 2.7 trailer, we are bound to find out the answer to that question, though it might be safer to say that what might have corrupted Durin also got to the nameless Yaksha. Now, what's interesting about the sudden surge of abyssal energy in the chasm is one thing. What in the world were they fighting down there? According to the tenacity of the Millith, out of the depths of the boundless night sky above, there was an iron meteorite that impacted the chasm during the Cataclysm, and allegedly, this was the start of the Cataclysm in Liyue, which is even more suspicious because if Khaenriah was supposed to be underground, why is the invasion coming from above? And if it wasn't Khaenriah, then what in the world was the iron meteorite? Even more so, what in the world are they even fighting during the Cataclysm? We never really get what's inside the iron meteorite in the first place. We can't say that they're Abyss Heralds or Abyss Lectors because we are told that the citizens turned into the monsters of the Abyss after the first cataclysmic event, and it was a form of divine punishment. So what is inside that iron meteorite initially? If you did the quest where you talked to the starving Fatui, they call the Cataclysm the Dark Calamity and the Calamity of Darkness. They said it's never stopped even to this day, and knowing that the Fatui are also fighting against the Calamity, and that the unnamed Yaksha is still down in the chasm somewhere, I would say they're right. Was it more Rift Hounds? Was it like a Durin situation where there is another abyssal monster but we just haven't been introduced to it yet? Who knows at this point? Not even Zhongli wants to talk about it. Oh, as for Marchosius' role in the Cataclysm, there's no confirmation that Goba fell asleep after cleansing the land 500 years ago. We can just assume that Goba fell asleep around the time after the Archon War, but before the Cataclysm itself, though there is no certain evidence of when he fell asleep. All that we know is that it was probably centuries ago. Out of all the nations, Inazuma is the one where we directly have an idea of what happened during the Cataclysm from a first-hand experience. Instead of a song like Venti or Silence from Zhongli, A was quite upfront with what happened during the Cataclysm and where she was. The story of the Cataclysm in Inazuma predate the Cataclysm itself, beginning with a Kitsune named Urakusai. He was an associate of the Kitsune Saiguu up until the Cataclysm. Allegedly, his actions may have contributed to the Abyss's invasion of Inazuma during the Cataclysm. He made a mistake that greatly angered the Kitsune Saiguu, therefore causing his banishment. Then we move on to the Cataclysm proper. In A Story Quest Part 2, we hear several dialogues of NPC during the Cataclysm itself. The Cataclysm in Inazuma involved the Rift Hounds and the continuous poisoning of the land. The number of named casualties in Inazuma are strangely longer than the ones in other nations. The two people seen in the trailer of A Story Quest are Torachiyo and the Kitsune Saiguu. Torachiyo was swallowed whole by a beast that had a tiger's body and a serpent's tail, while she was holding back the forces of darkness. She was able to free herself from the creature's innards, but within the belly of the beast, she was stained by a deep sin and saw her comrades ripped to shreds by those blood-red teeth. Steeped in darkness as far as the eyes could see, she would eventually draw her sword upon the almighty Narukami Ogosho. In the legends, her fate was unknown, but in the trailer, we see that A was the one that fought her for the last time. The Kitsune Saiguu, on the other hand, was a close friend of A and was someone who disappeared during the Cataclysm. According to the lore, the Kitsune Saiguu disappeared into the deep darkness, never to be seen again. However, her body and mind were consumed and her memories were powerful enough to manifest into Kazari. In her final breath, the Kitsune Saiguu asked the dark will that gnawed on her to spare her memories. The following is what A has to say about her deceased friend.
Yes. Inazuma was facing many great crises at that time. Some were local in origin, while others came from the now fallen kingdom of Khaenriah. The disaster in Inazuma caused me great concern. I felt that I had to step in before it was too late, otherwise it would spread to all of Teyvat. But my friend, Kitsune Saiguu, reassured me that I had nothing to worry about. She would shoulder the responsibility of protecting Inazuma and mobilize all forces at her disposal to combat the threat. I could tell that, although neither of us acknowledged it, we both knew that the road ahead would likely end in tragedy. Indeed, countless monsters suddenly appeared throughout all of Inazuma. In the end, Kitsune Saiguu sacrificed her life to protect the people. I never had the chance to see her one last time. But I would like to believe that she kept her promise to me until the very last. But even then, Inazuma was left more devastated than we could have ever imagined. Those terrible tragedies left great wounds that are still felt to this day, both on the land itself and in my heart.
To continue the tale of the Kitsune Saiguu, Shiki Taishou was also created by Harunosuke as a means to defend the people of Inazuma from the corruption of the land. Shiki Taishou and his duplicates were created to defend Inazuma from the great evil that plagued its soil. The Shikigami were assigned to the samurais to protect them, and as a form of mystical power, they would take down the monsters together. Another named NPC that died during the Cataclysm was a man known as Takamine the Mist-Splitter. Takamine was a famous martial artist in Inazuma who lived 500 years ago, and he was the creator of the Mist-Splitter Reforged and the Thundering Pulse. When the Cataclysm struck, Takamine accompanied Baal on her campaign to the Abyss, but he was separated from the rest. He was left to fend off for himself. With only his Mist-Splitter, he waged fight after fight against the Abyss, only for his sword to break. Takamine managed to survive and return to Inazuma many years later, only to be killed by his lover upon reuniting with her. Well, that's even sadder. Then we have the death of the original Electro Archon, Makoto or Baal. Makoto's death was what drove A to the pinnacle of grief during the Cataclysm. But one has to wonder, Makoto was called to Khaenriah allegedly without A's knowledge. Of course, Khaenriah itself was also suffering from the Cataclysm, as we've heard from Dainsleif. The Cataclysm wasn't something that the Khaenrian citizens wanted, but what I have to wonder was, what did Archons do in Khaenriah? Were they also there to witness what happened to the citizens? And what was so devastating in Khaenriah that A had to be kept in the dark? Yes, maybe it is just to simply protect A. As a sister, maybe Makoto thought it was her responsibility, that A didn't deserve whatever might come from Khaenriah, and therefore was willing to go for her sake. Well, until we get to ask Venti, there's really no one else that might be able to tell us at the moment. The God of Woods perished during the Cataclysm. This much we know, and that they were replaced by Kusanali, the current Denjo Archon. I won't be theorizing about what really happened with the God of Woods or if the God of Wisdom has any connection to the past. This isn't the video for that. The outcome of the Cataclysm deeply caused grief in the Tsaritsa, so much so that she broke off ties with Barbados and established the Fatui with Piero. Looking at her actions now, it's a curiosity to know what did happen in the Cataclysm and why was the Tsaritsa so angered. If you talk to the Fatui, they're all speaking as if they're preparing for an upcoming war, and when you talk to Katarina in the Chasm, she says that all Fatui await for a single nightfall. What that means is currently unknown to us, but that might connect with what Tartaglia said about the Tsaritsa, that she was once a kindred spirit, too kindred that she needed to steel herself with the gravity of the situation. When you see the dialogue of the Tsaritsa, we see her say to burn away the old world. Maybe that's what she thought Celestia did with Khaenriah. Maybe she thought that the purging of Khaenriah was merely the erasing of the old world, and as a form of rebellion and retribution, perhaps that's also something that she wants to do. The key to this question, though, is understanding what happened with Snezhnaya and the Tsaritsa to make her consider such a brash course of action. But yes, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for chilling with me.